press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Namaste children. In our last class we discussed about the structure of eye, different parts of eye and also the mechanism of vision. In this class we discuss about another sense organ, that is ear, the structure of ear and the mechanism of hearing, that we are going to discuss in our today's class. So before going to that, we will draw a diagram of the ear. This is middle ear. label the parts. So, the ear is an organ which helps us in hearing sounds, and also it helps to maintain balance of our body and posture. So, coming to the structure of ear, so it contains, the structure of ear is divided into three parts, that is outer ear. Up to tympanic membrane it is outer ear, this part is middle ear and inner ear. The structure of ear is divided into three parts, outer ear, middle ear and inner ear. The outer ear consists of pinna and external auditory meatus or external auditory canal. So, we see the black secretion by the cells called ceruminous glands. Ceruminous glands are modified sweat glands. They secrete ear wax. Understood? And the external auditory canal ends with a membrane called tympanic membrane. It is also called eardrum. This tympanic membrane is made up of connective tissue and it faces skin towards the outer ear and membrane towards the middle ear. The eardrum is made up of connective tissues. It is having two surfaces. One surface which faces the outer ear is having skin. The surface which faces the middle ear is having membrane. Then the tympanic membrane is also called eardrum. That importance we will discuss in the mechanism of hearing. That is connected with the three ear ossicles. Malleus, incus and stapes are called ear ossicles. They are small bones. Malleus is of hammer shaped bone. Malleus is of hammer shaped bone. Incus is of anvil shaped bone. And stapes is of stirrup shaped bone or stirrup under iತರ C shape ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. So that is stapes is of stirrup shaped bone. See, hammer, malleus, this is incus, and very smallest bone in the ear ossicles is stapes. So the middle ear contains tympanic membrane and three bony small bones called ear ossicles, ಯಾವ್ದು malleus, incus and stapes. The middle ear is filled with air. It is filled with air, and this eustachian tympanic membrane and this cavity which is filled with air is in contact with the pharynx through a tube called eustachian tube. Through a tube called eustachian tube that helps to balance the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane. This eustachian tube connects the middle ear with the pharynx that helps to equalize the pressure between the on either side of the ear drum. And this malleus, incus and stapes helps to speed up the vibrations to reach the inner ear. The stapes is in contact with the inner ear through a opening called oval window. Through a opening called oval window. We have three windows in the inner ear. One is oval window, another one is round window. Oval window is also called fenestra ovalis. Round window is also called fenestra rotundus. The inner ear contains membranous part and bony part. The inner ear contains membranous part and bony part. Before the inner ear, in the inner ear we see two parts, cochlear part and vestibular part. Cochlear part mainly involved in mechanism of hearing. Vestibular part mainly involved in mechanism of balancing body posture. Balancing body posture. That is about the structure of ear. See, before rubbing this, once again you see the structure of ear is divided into three parts: outer ear, middle ear and inner ear. Understood? So outer ear consists of pinna and external auditory meatus. In the external auditory canal, we see a wax secreting glands called ceruminous glands. They are modified sweat glands. And in the middle ear, we have tympanic membrane, which is made up of connective tissue having skin towards the outer ear and membranous part towards the middle ear. In the middle ear, we see three small bones called ear ossicles, that is malleus, incus and stapes. They are connected to each other in a chain-like fashion, and stapes is in contact with the inner ear through an opening called oval window. In the inner ear, we see two openings, one the oval window, another one is round window. The middle ear is filled with air. It is fully filled with air, and that is in contact with the pharynx through a tube called eustachian tube that helps to equalize the pressure on either side of the eardrum. Coming to inner part of the ear, it is having two parts, vestibular part and cochlear part. The cochlear part, circular part of the inner ear, mainly concerned with the mechanism of hearing. And this vestibular part helps in maintaining balance of body and posture. Understood? So, I will write here the inner ear. soft bony part. The inner cochlear part consists of membranous part and bony part. Together we call it as labyrinth. Together we call it as labyrinth. See, this is this part, the circular part, cochlear part. This part is cochlear part, having, it is consist of bony labyrinthis and membranous labyrinthis. So this what we are, blue color, grey color idella, that is bony labyrinthis. Inside the bony labyrinthis we see membranous labyrinthis. So resinous membrane and basilar membrane. So under membranous labyrinthis we have two membranes, resinous membrane and basilar membrane. Inside this we see a presence of lymph. The fluid which is peripheral to the bony labyrinthis is called perilymph. So scala vestibuli consists of perilymph. Peri means peripheral to the bone. Fluid which is either side of the bone is called perilymph. The scala vestibuli consists of perilymph. Hagene scala tympani. This one is scala tympani. This also contain perilymph because see they are peripheral to the bone. So in the scala tympani we see perilymph and in scala vestibuli we see perilymph. And see here a fluid between the membrane, between the resinous membrane and basilar membrane, we see a scala media which contain endolymph, endo means inside, middle, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಇದರ ಅಕ್ಕಪಕ್ಕ ಯಾವುದು ಬೋನ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. Endolymph, either side of the endolymph we see a membrane. One side we see resinous membrane, another side we see basilar membrane. So this scala media contain endolymph. Ella competitive question nimge. Endolymph, scala media contain endolymph, scala vestibuli contain, and scala tympani they contain perilymph, and scala vestibuli opens into oval window, scala tympani opens into round window. Scala vestibular opens into round window. Sorry, scala vestibular opens into oval window and scala tympani opens into round window. And in the scala media we see a structure called organ of Corti. It is very important. Organ of Corti. This organ of Corti having a cells called air cells. It contains a cells called air cells. The apical part of that air cell is having air-like structures called stereocilia. It's called stereocilia. That air-like structure is in contact with a membrane called pectoral membrane, and base of that cells are in contact with afferent nerve. Nodi, organ of Corti is a very important structure present in the scala media that lie above the basilar membrane. What it contain? It contain air cells. Apical part and the ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ air cells, in the apical part of the air cell we see air-like structure called stereocilia. They are in contact with a membrane called pectoral membrane. And basal part, the ಕೆಳಗಡೆ part, basal parts are in contact with the afferent nerve. They are in contact with afferent nerve. This is about the structure of cochlear. So the cochlear part contain inner ear, contain bony labyrinthus and membranous labyrinthus. Below the bony labyrinthus we see membranous labyrinthus which are filled with lymph. The fluid which is periphery to the bony labyrinthus are called perilymph, and which are either side of the membrane parts they are called endolymph. So we have scala vestibuli which contain perilymph, scala tympani which contain perilymph, and scala media which contain endolymph. The scala vestibuli is lined by a membrane called resinous membrane. The scala tympani is lined by a membrane called basilar membrane. So scala media is having one side resinous membrane, another side basilar membrane. We see a organ of Corti which is very important structure in the mechanism of hearing that is present on basilar membrane. Adu kuda competitive question nimge. That organ of Corti lie on the basilar membrane. What it contain? It contain air cells. That air cells having apical part ಏನಿರುತ್ತೆ air-like structures are seen, that is called stereocilia. They are in contact with pectoral membrane. Basal part is in contact with afferent nerve or sensory nerve. So this is about the structure of cochlea. Understood? And mechanism of hearing. So before going to the vestibular part, I'll explain mechanism of hearing. So when sound reaches the pinna in the form of waves, that waves are carried to the middle ear through external auditory metres. When sound reaches the ear, that sounds are carried to the middle ear in the form of waves, and that waves, when they strikes the tympanic membrane, this tympanic membrane will start vibrating. Sound waves ಇಲ್ಲಿ strike ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ದಂಕಲೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, tympanic membrane will start vibrating. When it starts vibrating, the malleus, incus and stapes are also starts vibrating, and they transfer that sound waves to the inner ear through an opening called vowel window. Understood? These ear ossicles transfer the sound waves from the tympanic membrane to the inner ear through an opening called vowel window. That waves, when reaches the inner ear, what they'll do, they produce waves in the fluid. They produce waves in the fluid present in the inner ear. When waves are produced inside the fluid, that ripple this air cells, basilar membrane. Ripple ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, waves strike ಆಗುತ್ತೆ for the basilar membrane. When waves strikes the basilar membrane, air cell, the air cells which have stereo on their apical part will touch a stectorial membrane. So this is stectorial membrane. These are stereo or air-like structures of the air cell. So ಕೆಳಗಡೆಯಿಂದ waves ಬಂದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, it touches the stectorial membrane and bend. Air cells are going to bend. When airs bend against the stectorial membrane, action potential is generated in the afferent nerve or sensory nerve. Through this afferent nerve or sensory nerve, it is carried to the auditory nerve. From there to the auditory cortex, where the impulse is analyzed and sound is going to be recognized. Once again, I'll explain. When the sound reaches the external ear in the form of waves, that wave strikes the tympanic membrane. When it strikes the tympanic membrane will start vibrating. When it starts vibrating, the bones attached to the tympanic membrane, that is malleus, incus and stapes, are also starts vibrating, and they transfer that waves to the inner ear through an opening called vowel window. From that vowel window, the waves enter into the fluid part of the inner ear. They enter into the fluid part of the inner ear, and waves are produced in the fluid of the inner ear. Illi waves produce ಆದಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, they ripple, they push the basilar membrane upwards. When the basilar membrane is rippled, then the air cells having air-like structures called stereocilia, when they strike the stectorial membrane, they bend the air, and at the same time, at the basal part of the air cells which are in contact with the afferent nerve, in that afferent nerve we see the generation of action potential, and the sound waves are carried to the auditory cortex with the help of auditory nerve in the form of nerve impulse, and in the auditory cortex the impulse is analyzed and sound is going to be recognized. That is about the mechanism of hearing. Understood? Then coming to the vestibular part mainly concerned with the maintenance of body balance and posture. It is having 3 semicircular canals at right angles to each other. They are present in different planes, but all 3 are right angles to each other, and they have an expanded part called utricle and sacula. The both bones are called otolith. Together they are called otolith, and the expanded part of the semicircular canals called ampulla. Expanded part of the semicircular canals called ampulla, and they are also filled with fluid. And this expanded part of the ampulla contain an elevated ridge-like structure called crista ampullaris. Crista ampullaris, And utricles and sacula, they also contain a elevated ridge called macula. See, crista and sacula, utriculae and sacula, they also have a elevated and extended part. Utricle and sacula, they also contain a elevated part or ridge-like part called macula. This cristae and macula mainly acts as a receptors. They act as a receptors and they helps in maintaining balance of our body and posture. Understood? Vestibular part consists of 3 semicircular canals at right angles to each other, and they contain an expanded part of bone called utriculae and saculae. The expanded part of semicircular canals are called ampulla. The ampular part is having elevated or ridge-like structure called crista ampullaris. And even the utriculae and saculae, they both have a elevated ridge-like structure called, together it is called maculae. They contain 8 cells. Understood? They contain receptors that cristae, ampullaris and maculae, these two are very important structures that helps to maintain balance of our body and posture. Understood? That is about vestibular apparatus, which mainly helps to maintain balance of our body and posture, and this cochlear part, circular part, cochlear part mainly helps in mechanism of hearing. So, schematic representation of mechanism of hearing I will show you. Structure of ear will come for 5 marks. So, ear ossicles are 3 in number, that is malleus, incus and stapes. In these 3, very smallest bone is stapes, and tympanic membrane is a part of middle ear. Eustachian tube connects middle ear with the pharynx, that mainly helps to equalize pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane. So, sound waves they reach external auditory meatus. From there see When the sound waves reaches the external ear, they reach the tympanic membrane through the external auditory meatus and it starts vibrating. When it vibrates, the waves reaches the malleus, incus and stapes, and again all these three ear ossicles vibrates. All these three ear ossicles vibrates and transfer that waves into the inner part of the ear, that is cochlear region, where we see the waves production in the fluid present in the inner ear. When waves are produced, the waves ripple the basilar membrane. This is basilar membrane. They ripple the basilar membrane. When they push the basilar membrane, the air cells which is having stereocilia at the apical part will push against the tectoral membrane and they are going to bend. This air-like structure is going to bend, and at the same time we see the generation of action potential in the afferent nerve which are present at the base of the air cells, which are present at the base of the air cell. This whole part is called organ of corti. This whole part is called organ of corti. This is tectoral membrane. Understood? When action potential is generated here, that will be carried to the auditory cortex through afferent nerve and auditory nerve. In the auditory cortex, the waves are analyzed, impulses are analyzed and sound is going to be recognized. It is mechanism of hearing. Sound waves reaches the pinna. Pinna collects all the sound waves and deliver it to the external auditory canal or meatus, and from there it reaches tympanic membrane and it vibrates. Tympanic membrane vibrates and transfers to ear ossicles. Even ear ossicles, that is malleus, incus and stapes, are going to vibrate. From the ear ossicles it reaches inner ear. From the inner ear it produces waves in the fluid. That waves in the fluid of inner ear ripple basilar membrane, then stereocilia of air cell bent against tectorial membrane, ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅವಾಗ action potential is generated at the base of air cells that is in contact with afferent nerve. And from there it reaches the auditory cortex through auditory nerve. Where impulse is analyzed and sound is going to be heard. Understood? When sound waves reaches the ear pinna, which is vestigial, pinna is vestigial, it doesn't have any functional use, but it collects all the sound waves and directs that to enter into the external auditory matrix. So sound waves, when reaches the pinna, all the sound waves are directed to enter into the external auditory canal or matrix, where it reaches the tympanic membrane. Once it strikes the tympanic membrane will start vibrating. That vibrations are carried by the ear ossicles and transferred to the inner ear, and in the inner ear that waves will again produce waves in the fluid present in the inner ear that makes the basilar membrane ripple against the when the waves ripple the basilar membrane, the air cells are going to bend against the tectorial membrane. During that time, action potential is generated at the base of the air cells, which is in contact with the afferent nerve. That generates action potential that is carried to the auditory cortex. Impulse generated in the afferent nerve is carried to the auditory cortex through auditory nerve, where impulse is analyzed, and sound is recognized. Understood? This is schematic representation of mechanism of hearing. So ನಿಮಗೆ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಟಿವ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋ ಅಂತದಂದ್ರೆ will ask the tympanic membrane belongs to which part of the ear? It belongs to middle part of the ear, and middle ear is filled with air, and middle ear is in contact with the pharynx through a tube called eustachian tube that helps to equalize the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane. How many ear ossicles are there? 3 ear ossicles are there. Which are those? Malleus, incus and stapes. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಮಾಲೆಸ್ಟ್ ಯಾವುದು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಸ್ಟೇಪಿಸ್, and that smallest stapes is in contact with the inner ear through a opening called oval window, or fenestra ovalis. Understood? And organ of corti is present on which membrane anta keltare? Organ of corti is present on basilar membrane. What it contain? It contain air cells, and on the apical part of this is an air cell. Apical part, it is having air like structure called stereocilia, and basal part is in contact with afferent nerve, and this stereocilia is in contact with pectoral membrane. This all constitute organ of corti. Understood? Organ of corti lie on the basilar membrane having air cells. Apical part contain air-like structure called stereocilia, which is in contact with pectoral membrane, and basal part is in contact with afferent nerve or sensory nerve. Understood? And vestibular part, mainly it is having 3 semicircular canals which are right angles to each other, and expanded part of bone called utricle and saculae. The expanded part or semicircular canal is called ampulla. All these have a elevated ridge-like structure. The elevated ridge-like structure of ampulla is called crista ampullaris. Elevated ridge-like structure of utricula and sacula are called macula. They both, crista ampullaris and macula, are mainly responsible for maintenance of balance of body and posture. Understood? So that completes the chapter neural control and coordination. So please concentrate while reading the textbook. Each line is your question in your competitive exams. Understood? Thank you.